Good evening and welcome to the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting for December 2nd, 2013. The first item of business is to approve the agenda. Are there any items that commissioners would like to add to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, motion for approval.
So moved.
In a second. Okay, motion moved. The second item is for citizen comment. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission? Seeing none, we will move to the third item of business, approval of minutes for the meeting on November 18th. Commissioners, is there anything you would like to add or anything you would like to make observations on in the minutes?
Nothing at this end, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I just have a couple myself. The meeting was called to order at 6:30 p.m., not 7 o'clock. And Stuber's name should be removed from all of the motions that were made since he was not present. And on approval of the agenda, Ulrich's name needs to be added to the ayes.
Very good. I'll make those additions.
Okay, that brings us to the fourth item, which is...
Madam Chair, we need a motion and a second.
I'm sorry, of course we do. Okay, a motion for the approval of minutes.
I'll motion.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. The motion is moved. The fourth item is review of the Dworsky Wetland Replacement Application by Daryl Jacobson.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Daryl Jacobson, the Water Resource Specialist here for the City of Burnsville. The application before you tonight is for the filling of 0.67 acres of Type 7 wetland. The reason for the request of filling is the site is going to be futurely developed with a 57,000 square foot office warehouse complex. There is some road projects nearby, and so the proposal would be to use the soil from that road project, the excess soil, bring it into this site to replace the organic soils that are currently there, and then that would make the site buildable and bring in the office warehouse. The wetland is very degraded in its current state. It's actually been disturbed previously. It's near a car dealership. And I think at one point the dealership in the past used it for like an off-road testing ground for vehicles. And so you can see that there is disturbance already at the site that occurred, I don't know when it occurred, but sometime in the past. A lot of invasive species present. It's not in very good shape as it sits. The proposal for the wetland would be to buy wetland credits. And you do have to buy those at a 2-to-1 ratio over what the impact is. So the applicant is proposing to purchase 1.34 acres of wetland credit that is in the watershed following all the Wetland Conservation Act requirements. Just up on the screen here, I have the project location. You can see it's up on the north part of the city by kind of by County Road 5 and Highway 13. And then this next screen shows the delineated wetland area. And so they would be proposing to fill in the entire wetland as part of this project. We did send this out to the TEP members. It's a technical evaluation panel. Consists of Minnesota DNR, Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District, Board of Soil and Water Resources, and they reviewed the wetland application, and we did not receive any comments from those agencies other than the Board of Soil and Water Resources now has a new form for the wetland credits, and the form that was originally used was an old version, and so they requested that we update that and use the current form. That form has been filled out and submitted, so now the paperwork is on the current documents. And so the agencies that reviewed this did not have any issue with the project as it's proposed. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Do commissioners have any questions? Or
So is the wetland bank in Burnsville?
It's not in Burnsville. It's the way the Wetland Conservation Act sets up replacement areas is by major watersheds. And so you have to replace the wetland in that major watershed. So it is in
Okay.
the major watershed that Burnsville is in, but the site is not in Burnsville.
Commissioner Wolf?
Yes, Daryl, do you have this image without the pink covering by any chance?
I don't have that here tonight.
It looks as though it's forested pretty heavily. Have you been there?
Yes, I have.
Is that the case?
There are trees on the site. It's pretty open in there. The trees are spread around. Obviously, when you get the canopy cover, it makes it look like it's pretty dense. But as I
So-
mentioned, there is, areas where people have driven through there. So it definitely is open enough that you can see the track where people have driven around. But certainly there is trees on the site.
So under the pink, there would be some open area, some standing water at times.
There was no standing water when I've been on the site.
Okay.
It is, obviously it is a wetland, so there is water there periodically, but it is not like a pond. It's not constantly holding water.
What's the source of the water?
The source of the water is probably twofold. There probably is some drainage, and the majority of the water is probably drainage from the surrounding area. There is untreated stormwater that's currently going into the site from, you can see the building and parking lots nearby, and so that's probably the majority of the water that's coming in the site.
Is there any spring water?
We did not find any spring water, but we looked at one snapshot in time. It was 2012 when the delineation was actually approved. And so we were out on site. You could not see any water seeping in, but there was moist soils. So
The reason I'm asking is that the so-called fens, calcareous fens along the Minnesota River there are rare wetlands, valuable wetlands. And it would certainly be nice to know a little bit more about the source of the water to know what kind of little wetland we may be dealing with. So that's the reason for my question. Maybe I'll ponder that myself a little bit. And
well, I will say that, obviously the DNR did review this application. They did not pose any concerns. There was no high-value plant species on site. So I think
who did that survey?
that survey was Bolton and Mink, a consulting firm that does wetland delineations, has staff on hand. The city does require that anyone that submits a wetland delineation to the city be a state-certified wetland delineator. So they did have to go through the proper trainings, and they do have to do yearly credits.
Were they paid by the developer?
Yes. But we do go on site and verify their work. So the boundary you see here is what was agreed to is the wetland boundary by their consultant, also city staff, and we did have other folks, other agencies on site back in 2012 to review that delineation, and everyone agreed that this was the proper boundary.
Thank you, Darrell.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? I have a couple questions. One is, what exactly is a Type 7 wetland?
It's like a seasonally flooded type area, and so that is something that this probably holds more water in the spring after snow melt. If you get a big rain event, like I mentioned, a lot of the water that comes to this site is draining off the neighboring properties. So it's not a permanent pool of water. It's a seasonally type wetland.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. And if I may, I'd like to just voice that I strongly disapprove of filling the wetland for the reasons, one of which you just mentioned. It sounds like it's still performing some ecological function, and I think there's more benefit in that than the building application. my preference would be to see buildings reusing sites that have been developed and abandoned commercially. I think that's more valuable than creating artificial wetlands elsewhere to make up for the loss of this wetland. So those are my personal feelings. Yes, Commissioner.
So I see that they're going to remove the high organic soils. What is the use of the soils going to be when they're removed to bring in the construction soils?
Well, that will be up to the developer to decide what to do with those soils. They have to, they haven't submitted a building application yet, so we don't have all those details. But it'll be, essentially they'll have to remove the unstable organic soils are unstable for building, so they'll have to remove those, take them off-site somewhere, and then bring in the good soils.
Are there any other questions from commissioners? Yes.
I have a follow-up. Thank you. Darrell, just as a matter of policy and philosophy, I lean towards approving this because of the degraded nature of the wetland and assuming that that it is as described. But here's my concern. It's sort of a creep that the wetlands, the further we move, the more degradation we have, which encourages us to move further. What is the overarching plan to protect what's left? So we're not always talking about sacrificing this degraded wetland, that degraded wetland. Is there a line that we don't cross, so to speak?
Yes, the city has a wetlands management plan, and that plan lays out the, different kind of thresholds for the quality of wetland. So we do have some wetlands that are extremely high quality, and basically in that plan states that and has it different things in place that would make it extremely difficult to impact those wetlands based on what we have in the policy. Also, this technical evaluation panel, every application I get, I send out to that group to get everybody's feedback on. And I can tell you that on past projects that I've worked on, getting approval to fill wetlands is not necessarily an easy thing, and getting those other agencies, ultimately the city is the LGU and gets to make the decision on these applications. But it is not always easy to get those other agencies to recommend to move forward with those applications. This one actually was fairly easy by wetland application standards because the site is so degraded. These wetland banks that are out there are high quality wetlands when they're completed, and so you are getting, as it's stated in here, there is an argument to be made that by some of these degraded wetlands being filled in, you're getting a higher quality wetland somewhere else, and so there is a potential benefit to that aspect of these transactions.
What's the timeline on the bank credits or the wetland bank credits being completed?
They are done.
They're done, so they've already.
The wetland is already in place.
Okay.
Yep. And so the state has these wetland banks all organized. And so the wetland has already been created, and now it's sitting there with these credits available for people to use. So the wetland that would be, the credits that would be purchased as part of this project, the wetland already exists.
Do you have something?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, following up on what some of you guys have been saying, I'm looking at the map here, and it's taking away a lot of that forested area that's wetland beneath. And I looked at a map of this area before coming to the meeting, and there isn't a lot of green area in this very industrial commercial area, which to me means that this is even a higher value because it's would provide a stepping stone for different components that are in nature, the birds and the wildlife, that this is more important for them, even though to us it seems degraded because of the invasive species and the past use of this area. So I'm wondering if has there ever been any consideration or studies done as to what it would take to restore this area so it wasn't considered degraded any longer?
Not to my knowledge, there hasn't been any of that type of work done. Again, this is a private parcel, so it's, the city doesn't own it. And so we haven't done any of those type of studies on this property.
Okay. Thank you.
Follow up, Daryl, where would the nearest high-quality wetland be to this? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, the nearest high-quality wetland is probably up in the wildlife refuge, up along the river. There's some very high-quality wetlands in that area. That's
So
probably
to the east,
yes, north and east, yeah.
towards the north and east. And those aren't cities, though. The city property, that's in the wildlife refuge?
Yes.
How about on city property?
On city property to here, it's probably maybe the Kramer Nature Preserve, which is just south and west. Some high-quality wetlands in that park as well.
I think I know where we're located here. The prior waste disposal site dump, for lack of a better word, would be straight to the north of this.
Pretty close, yeah. Let's see if I can pull this. So yeah, you can see this is the approximate location of the site.
Right.
And then up, this area is the Kramer mining quarry and the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
Is takes up a big portion of this area.
Also about the Kramer Nature Preserve, that area was artificially created to make up for wetlands that were being developed elsewhere?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Any other questions by commissioners? Anything from staff?
Nothing.
Okay. Thank you for your time and your presentation. I think we move now for, do we need to make a motion for an approval? Okay. Do I have a motion for an approval?
I'll motion for approval.
A second.
Okay, all in favor of approving this application?
Aye.
Recommend for, okay, and please record myself as a nay.
Very good.
Okay, the fifth item on our agenda is miscellaneous, and it looks like we have 2 items to consider.
Madam Chair, just 2 items under miscellaneous. On your original scheduled work plan or meeting schedule, we did list December as the meeting where we were going to discuss memorials in our parks. That item is not ready yet. We'll move that off to our January meeting. And then also attached in your background packet is a tentative 2014 meeting schedule with just a couple of the topics that we know were already on our work plan, just kind of penciled in. And when we adjourn and go to work session, we can talk about some additional topics to kind of help round out our schedule for the 2014 calendar year. So. And then with that, Commissioners, our next meeting would be scheduled for January 6th, 2014.
Thank you. Are there any other items commissioners would like to share? Okay, seeing none. Do we need to have a motion for approval of miscellaneous?
No motion is necessary.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our formal meeting agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Okay. Second. Okay, and the motion carries. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you all for attending or watching the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission.